this was the most surprising move, maybe of the entire Grand Prix thus far. Well, you can be a big fish in a small pond, or you can be the big fish 1995 in a small group here at the Grand Prix. It is Vladimir Fedoseev with our game of the day. And this one was a great one, Keti, starting with a Sicilian that was close.
That was close, Sicilian, and Grigoriy Oparin played really nice opening where Fedoseev decided to play e5, and he closed even more the position.
Yeah, no d4 for you, he said. But Keti, after bishop c4, we saw a struggle for some of these light squares, in particular, as in the case of the most son, this d5 square.
Yes, and white really used that d5 square as white here also developed the bishop on g5, and he was anytime ready to give up this bishop in order to control d5, very important square.
And that's why Fedoseev drops the knight back to d7. He says, I don't want to give you my knight, even though we hear bishops better than knights, not in this position. The d5 square, very important. And look at this, bishop to d2 back. And Keti, at this moment, you could almost call this one of the critical moments of the game with knight b6, because when white took, Fedoseev took back with the pawn.
Yeah, that's very interesting decision why Fedoseev here decided to double his pawns, because we know that double pawns are not very often strength, but they are weaknesses. The idea of doubling the pawn was to open up his a8 rook, and we're going to see very soon why this move was so important.
That's right. Anytime there are double pawns, it means there's an open file. That rook on 8 develops in its starting place. And look at this. The game continues c3, normal looking move, trying to control the center. King h8, Keti, that was another move that we really liked.
Yeah, this move was not really our favorite. We thought that bishop comes on e6 was the move that Fedoseev here would choose, as c4 bishop seems to be very strong. But Fedoseev had a plan when he played king h8. His plan is to push f5 and to start kingside attack. And here, Grigoriy answered like, hold on, I am the one who was going to start kingside attack, and he played h4.
That's right. King h8, a bit of a weird looking move, but after b4 first, the pawns went up the queen side, and then the knight came back to d. You're like, I thought you were trying to go f5 and all this stuff. Yeah, the position closed on the queen side first, and that means that white can try to go for more on the king side. But here is that move that we were talking about, f5 played by Fedoseev. That's why the king's on h8. And Keti, this pawn on h4, it's one pawn. It can't really attack that black king, right?
Not really. We saw some fancy checkmating ideas that usually we have in the daily puzzles or just puzzles on Chess.com, with this rook on h1, pawn on h5, and the knight coming on h4, g6 creates. But Fedoseev said like, oh man, I'm also solving that puzzle, so I know how to handle it.
Yeah, he's way too good to blunder that checkmate.
Yeah, instead of this fancy line that we just showed, he went for a bishop trade, and he played bishop e6, really safe move.
Exactly, because the king in the corner can only be in danger with that bishop on the board. And I like the move Oparin played queen b3, but Keti, after queen d7, this was the most surprising move maybe of the entire Grand Prix thus far.
Absolutely. Queen d7 is a hidden idea, and here Fedoseev's idea was to get this queen at very important square to start to attack white's pieces, especially after Grigoriy played a weird move, king d1.
Yeah, king d1. If you had one more turn to bring the king to c2, that would be great. And the reason why he didn't castle to the queen side was because if he did, that rook on a8, it's perfectly placed here. Pawn takes e4, pawn takes e4, bishop c4, queen c4. What? You're just trading pieces. That's not a big deal. But after queen e6, if you don't trade queens, you have to back away. You lose the a4 pawn. Your king's in trouble. If you trade queens, then after knight takes e6, there's nothing you can do to defend your a4 pawn. So this decision early in the game to take on b6 with the a pawn is paying off in a moment like this. So that's why Oparin didn't want to castle. Instead, he went king to d1. But Keti, this became very bad very quickly.
Absolutely. Another reason why he played king d1 was that he couldn't also castle on the short side because he pushed too much this h5 pawn. And of course, black would not have any problem to pick that pawn up. There can be something like trade the bishop, trade e4 pawn and get queen on g4 and attack this pawn right away and get that pawn.
Yeah, this would be good, but the game was even better because this is similar to the game, except the king was on d1. So after the trade on c4, the queen went to g4. Now g2 is under attack, which makes the knight, the f2 pawn, the rook all threatened. And after queen d3, c4, the queen dropped to e3. And Fedoseev didn't even take a pawn. If he had played queen takes g2, he attacks the rook, he steals a pawn. But after king e2, maybe there's some hope in this position for white to get the pieces over and attack the black king. So Keti, I really liked his move instead of taking on g2 to play knight e6.
Knight e6. This is such a brilliant move, and knight is on the way to get on d3. We're gonna see that in the game. That's exactly what happened, and this knight was the main character of this game and just simply won the game.
Yeah, it's a beautiful outpost for your knight. The c4 move that was attacking the queen earlier, now it came in to protect the knight. So here at this moment, white tried, Oparin went for a knight into f5, and Fedoseev said, I am good at sacrificing exchanges. Let's go for it. And Keti, the king on c2, that was a problem.
Bad looking, and knight can jump wherever knight wants to go, and there will be a discovery check. And obviously white's king has not a good square, but to come back on d1, which happened in the game. And this king was in between the rooks, and two rooks were never being connected. Black used this chance as well, and black attacked the rook on a1 and forced this rook to get at the worst square it can be.
Yeah, the rook's under attack. This knight is trying to go to d3 or c2 with checks. And after rook c1, during the game, we were talking about, you can get fancy. You can take on c1, knight c2 check, and take this queen, because at the end of the line here, black is up 2 pawns and about to take another one, but Fedoseev wanted more. He didn't want to go to an end game. He said, I'm playing a knockout of a game here. So instead of taking on c1, he went knight d3, and he still didn't take this rook, Keti. I mean, what a game he played.
No, instead he brought the rook from a8 to f8 to attack f2 pawn. That's a really juicy pawn over there. And after white pushed f3, there was a bit of surprise for us.
Yeah, we were looking at every move seemed appealing, and he plays e4. He is trying to open up the f file, because if the pawn were to take on e4 right now, the problem is that you open a file, the rook comes down to f2. You have to give up your queen. You can't take this knight without losing your bishop. Black would be up a queen and a minor piece with an attack against the rooks. So instead of taking on e4 here, the rook came to h1, and likely hoping that black would take on f3, because after pawn takes f3, king f1, even though black is still in the driver's seat, the king feels a little bit safer for the time being. No immediate checkmate, and the rook on h1 staring down here. There's at least some hope, some dream that you can hold this game. But Fedoseev said, not even a little bit. I'm going to play d5. I'm not taking anything. And he opens his bishop on e7.
Yeah, that move, e4 and d5, simply paralyzed white's pieces, and all rook is hanging on c1 with a check. Bishop is pinned by the queen. Queen itself is just stuck in between its pieces and also black's pawns. Rook controls f-file, and now on the last piece, which was not really playing, was the bishop, and he opens up this bishop, and bishop c5 will be the next black's move.
And so Oparin felt like he had to take on e4. The rook goes down to f2. Still can't take without losing the queen. For at most, it's going to be a queen and bishop for 2 rooks. That's going to be losing for white. He brings the king back, and then just an accurate move, queen to b3 check. The rook came to c2, and then queen to b1. So this is the whole point. After the rook came to c1, knight takes c1. You can't afford to take on c1 back. Queen c2 check, king e1, and finally, Keti, the bishop plays its part. Bishop c5, attacking the queen, distracting it away from the e2 mate.
Yeah, this king never had a good time in this game, traveled all the way in the center, and been, in the end, trapped.
Yeah, knight d3, discover check against that exposed king. And finally, queen takes h1, forcing resignation. Black is up a full piece with an attack still there. So a very clean game from Vladimir Fedoseev with interesting opening ideas. He moved his king to the corner. He doubled his queenside pawns. But Keti, it was a great game by him. And that is your rapid recap. So Fedoseev, he joins Wojtaszek in the lead in Group B. He has 2.5 out of 4. And I mean, Keti, really just a nicely played game for him from the black pieces.
Yes. Absolutely nicely played. Right before the rest day, he really needed this beautiful victory, and now he will come back with a better spirit. In Group A, we do have Hikaru Nakamura still keeping his leader's position. Grigoriy and Esipenko are following with a half point behind. And in Group C, we do have Aronian leading with 1 point ahead of Gujarati, Vidit, and Daniil Dubov.
That's right. Dubov won an important game against Vincent Keimer that gives him some chance to catch up to Aronian, but he gets black against Levon. Dubov played with the white pieces already against Levon. That was a draw without too much difficulty. So I think Levon is the one player who's really been in no trouble throughout this entire event. When I look from group to group, he has been the player. He is the highest scorer along with Wesley So, but Wesley So had an uncomfortable position against Hare Krishna, whereas Levon has never really had a struggle. So he is dominating Group C, and over there in Group D, we just mentioned the man Wesley So. Keti, that was an absolutely brilliant performance by him today, winning with black over Dominguez.